All right, let's just dive right into this explainer with a massive question. What actually happens when someone is handed unmatched, absolute power, both earthly and supernatural? Most historical figures who get even a tiny taste of that kind of authority, well, they end up completely corrupted by it. But there is one major historical exception that completely defies this rule.
So what happens when a single man is given total control over humans, animals, and literally the supernatural world? The narrative of Prophet Sulaiman, who you might also know as Solomon from Judeo-Christian traditions, is just as absolutely captivating character study. It pairs ultimate power with profound humility. We're looking at a guy who literally had it all, but never let it blind him to his higher purpose.
Okay, part 1, the ultimate kingdom.
So Suleiman succeeded his father, the incredibly wise King Dawood, taking over a dominion literally unlike anything else in recorded history. But we really need to understand his foundation here. The tradition clearly states that prophets do not leave behind dinar or dirham. The ulama are their heirs. Basically, he didn't just inherit some giant vault of gold. Instead, Prophet Sulaiman inherited his father's prophetic knowledge and the incredibly heavy burden of unmatched dominion. His foundation was entirely built on wisdom, not cash.
And this sets up a really brilliant contrast between two very famous rulers, Prophet Sulaiman on one side and the pharaoh on the other. I mean, both commanded massive empires, right? But Sulaiman's rule was entirely driven by knowledge and humility. He knew, without a doubt, that absolutely everything he had was just a temporary gift from God. The pharaoh, well, his rule was driven by ignorance and arrogance. He actually believed he was the ultimate source of his own power. Sulaiman always remembered he was just managing God's gifts.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of his God-given authority, just think about this one metric: 1 month. The source texts tell us he could actually command the wind itself. So a journey that would normally take a traveler a full, exhausting month to complete, Suleiman could cover that in a single morning. No way, right? Imagine having that kind of logistical dominance. And it wasn't just the weather. He actually commanded supernatural entities, the jinn, who built these massive structures and literally dove to the bottom of the oceans for him. Moving on to part 2, the burden of power.
Now, having absolutely everything at your fingertips is actually a severe test. And to see this, we look at a moment involving his magnificent noble breed horses. Just a quick side note here on Israeliyat. These are narrations that originate from Hebrew scriptures, and they require some really careful discernment in Islamic tradition. While we always avoid fabricated Israeliyat details that disrespect the prophets, the core verified text here shows us a deeply human moment. Suleiman became so wrapped up in inspecting these beautiful, well-trained horses that he literally lost track of time. He unintentionally missed the Asr prayer as the sun set behind the horizon. It wasn't deliberate disobedience at all. It was just a moment of forgetfulness, really rooted in his deep appreciation of God's beautiful creation.
But the very second he realized what happened, his reaction was instantaneous. He felt this immense remorse. He called the horses back immediately and dove straight into acts of charity and repentance. Now, scholars do debate the exact action he took here. Either he sacrificed the horses for charity to prove that absolutely nothing comes before his faith, or he affectionately stroked them to show his deep, God-centered appreciation. But either way, the takeaway is the same. His course correction was instant and absolute.
And that brings us to this powerful prayer. My Lord, forgive me, and grant me a kingdom such as will not belong to anyone after me. What's absolutely crucial to notice here is the order of his request. He asks for forgiveness first. That totally proves his mind was locked in on spiritual purity before he ever asked for this unprecedented earthly kingdom. He wasn't after a massive empire to feed his own ego. He wanted the resources so he could spread goodness.
Which leads us to section 3, subjects great and small. We can see exactly how he handled this vast kingdom by looking at a huge contrast, his massive, terrifying army alongside the absolute tiniest of creatures. There's this famous moment where an ant cries out, "O ants, enter your dwellings, that you not be crushed by Solomon and his soldiers." Just picture this. You have the grandest king on planet Earth, marching with an army of men, jinn, and wild animals. Yet he is perceptive enough to actually hear a single ant's warning down in a valley, and instead of getting a big head because insects are literally fleeing from his might, what does he do? He just smiles, he laughs, and he immediately prays to remain grateful. He totally gets that even his ability to hear a tiny ant is a profound blessing.
His strict yet deeply caring accountability shows up again in this next event, the case of the missing Hoopoe bird. Out of thousands upon thousands of subjects, Sulaiman somehow notices that a single, solitary hoopoe bird is missing from the ranks. I mean, think about that level of attention to detail from a world leader. And this catches his attention, setting off an incredible chain of events that leads us right to our next major turning point.
All right, part 4, the Queen of Sheba. So, that missing hoopoe bird? It eventually flies back with some pretty startling news about a kingdom ruled by a woman known as Bilqis, the Queen of Sheba. Now, her people were incredibly wealthy, but they worshipped the sun instead of God. This revelation kicks off an absolute masterclass of a diplomatic chess match. You've got the hoopoe's report, then Sulaiman sends a letter, she tries to send gifts which he rejects, then he moves her throne, and finally the glass floor illusion. But it all starts with Sulaiman's letter. He formally invites her to submit. Not to his empire, mind you, but to the oneness of God.
When Queen Bilqis gets this letter, she immediately pulls in her top advisors. And they proudly puff their chests and state, "We are a people of strength and great military might, but the decision is yours, so decide what you will command." Her generals are basically telling her, hey look, we can totally fight this guy. We have a massive, powerful army. They're reacting with pure worldly arrogance.
So this presents a massive, high-stakes dilemma. Will she choose war, or will she try diplomacy? I mean, how is a queen supposed to respond to a ruler who commands not just regular human soldiers, but literal lions, tigers, birds, and terrifying supernatural beings? Luckily for her kingdom, she happens to be an incredibly shrewd and perceptive leader.
She wisely chooses a diplomatic route. She decides to test the waters by sending envoys with these incredibly precious, jaw-droppingly expensive gifts. But Sulaiman, he completely rejects them. Why? Because his core mission is Tawheed. That's the indivisible oneness concept of monotheism in Islam. His one and only objective is spreading Tawheed, not stacking up more worldly wealth. You simply could not buy his integrity with treasure.
Knowing that Bilqis is now traveling to meet him in person, Sulaiman decides to facilitate a miracle, something that will really strengthen her faith. Step 1, he challenges the jinn to secure her heavily guarded throne all the way from Yemen. Step 2, this super powerful jinn offers rapid delivery, saying he can get it there before Sulaiman even stands up from his seat. But then, step 3, a figure with knowledge of the book delivers it in the literal blink of an eye. Sulaiman manages to transport her massive throne across entire regions before she even sets foot in his palace.
When she finally arrives, he presents her own throne to her, just slightly disguised. And she recognizes it, which really proves her wisdom. But then, he leads her over a transparent glass floor, built right over flowing water. Mistaking it for an actual pool, she lifts her dress to keep it dry. Sulaiman gently lets her know, hey, it's just smooth glass. By tricking her with this optical illusion, he brilliantly demonstrates that surface realities, like worshipping the physical sun just because it looks prominent and powerful, are mere illusions compared to the unseen creator. Recognizing this profound truth, she completely renounces polytheism and embraces Islam.
And that brings us to section 5, the final illusion.
We are now at the final chapter of Prophet Sulaiman's life, where his ultimate worldly power meets the ultimate earthly equalizer, because death comes to even the greatest king. As his appointed time drew near, Sulaiman made a highly unusual request. He asked the angel of death to take his soul while he remained seated perfectly upright, leaning heavily on his wooden staff. And God granted this request. He passed away, but to absolutely anyone looking, he appeared to just be quietly and intensely observing his kingdom.
The consequences of this were just dramatic. The subjugated jinns, who were forced to build his monumental structures, just kept laboring day and night in absolute fear. They were completely oblivious to his passing. And this served a massive theological purpose. It definitively proved to everyone that jinns do not know the unseen. They can't see the future, and they certainly aren't all-knowing gods. If they were, they would have dropped their tools and bolted immediately.
And here is the absolute most poetic twist of his entire epic life. A single termite brings down a king. It wasn't some massive invading army or a magical spell or a grand dramatic rebellion that finally revealed his passing to the world. It was a tiny, unseen termite, just quietly eating through his wooden staff over a long period of time until the wood finally snapped and his physical body fell to the floor.
Which leaves us with a really powerful question. If the greatest king's power can be undone by a single tiny termite, what does that say about the empires we build today? As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. We spend our entire lives chasing control, chasing wealth, chasing status. But Sulaiman's story brilliantly reminds us of the fragile illusion of worldly power. True greatness isn't about the power you can project. It's about the humility you maintain while you hold it. Thanks so much for joining me as we unpack this incredible story and keep questioning the reality of the power around you.